So The Gunfighters is a historical, which is also a comedy, something Doctor Who has only touched on a few times before, but this time it basically killed the idea. I don't think it's all that bad, but I can see why others would, and I do think that it has a few problems, but why sum up the serial in vague terms, when we can go in depth to understand why the serial is so bad, or at least less than desirable. So picking up where the trio were left, we discover that the sweets were not in fact deadly or anything like that. Instead, the Doctor just had toothache with the sweets setting off his pain. This is quite funny in a way, but anyone who knows the pain of toothache probably doesn't agree with that. But the true comedy of this scene is Stephen.
I was just practicing my quick draw. I reckon you don't know who I is. Dead-Eye Steve. The fastest. Meanest gun in the West.
I think you're smashing.
Dead-Eye Steve. He's quite the character. Dodo is also taking the chance to dress for the occasion, even getting a hat for the Doctor. We don't often see the mains dress up for the time period. It's really fun with them doing it. It really feels like something unique to this season. This is where we meet Mr. Wyatt Earp. So I'm not all that familiar with the events of the gunfights at the OK Corral and Tombstone, so this historical is not one for me, which is potentially why I enjoy it a bit more than most. So Mr. Wyatt is interesting. While he's not the deepest of characters, he's morally a bit grey, as he's the town sheriff but at the same time a good friend of Doc Holliday, a less than savoury character. Doc Holliday himself is incredibly memorable, but I'll talk about him when I get to his introduction, as we've got a few fun scenes to cover before that. Well, when I say a few, I mean one. This is one in which the Doctor introduces his party to Bat Masterson.
So allow me, sir, to introduce Miss Dodo Dupont, Wizard of the Ivory Keys, and Stephen Regret Tenor, and lastly, sir, your humble servant, Dr. Caligari.
Doctor Who?
Yes, you're quite right.
I do enjoy how he chooses a name which no one will remember, which given that this name never comes up again, I don't blame him. The Doctor's toothache subplot is wrapped up with Doc Holliday, as he is the town's dentist, with some very subtle advertising. While the Doctor is doing that, Stephen and Dodo go to solve themselves some rooms, because staying in Tombstone is a great idea. So time to point out actors, with the barman Charlie, who is played by David Graham, who had up to this point provided the voices of the Daleks with Peter Hawkins, but he's best known for his numerous roles on Jerry Anderson shows, most notably Parker from Thunderbirds. But he's not alone, as we have another notable Thunderbird star, Scott Tracy himself, Shane Rimmer as Seth Harper. So obviously the place they go to stay is the OK Corral itself. I mean, it is the best place to stay. The Clanton brothers are there looking for Doc Holliday, so when Stephen and Dodo mention the Doctor, the Clantons obviously misunderstand this and take action against them. And when I say action, I mean forcing them to sing and play piano.
With rings on their fingers and bells on their toes, the girls come to Tombstone in their high silk hose.
I suppose this would be the best chance to talk about the Ballad of the Last Chance Saloon. So the Ballad of the Last Chance Saloon is both a great song which is sung by the characters within the serial, but is also a piece of music used for the serial. By that I mean that throughout the serial we have the song being sung, often being used to build tension or to change the mood, but in the latter half it starts to become exposition. Singer-wise, within the serial we have Stephen and Kate, but the version which is used as a part of the soundtrack is sung by Linda Barron, who anyone from my generation will know from the show Come Outside, but will be relevant to Doctor Who again in another decade or so. To be fair to the song, it is a nice piece of music, but when it's used to explain the plot it really becomes too much and stretches out the songs at the point of being ridiculous. Now Doc Holliday. So the Doctor and the Doc meet with the sort of humour you expect from this serial. With the Doctor's need to have his tooth removed, he is given two options to quell the pain. Either drinking till he can't feel anything, but the Doctor isn't a drinker, something this serial reminds you of a few times oddly. With the other option...
Well, I could give you a rap on the cranium with this
six-shooter. Certainly not.
I don't know if the option he chose to just suck it up was the best option, but I suppose that tells you something of the Doctor, given how quickly he manages to bounce back from this operation. So let's talk about the Doc. That being Doc Holliday and not the Doctor. So he's definitely a character that works well within the serial. He rarely feels serious, but easily slips into being a threat whenever he composes himself. He has a relationship with Kate, but is definitely more fond of his operating chair, which he often shows far more concern for than her.
Now you move that real easy, real easy. That's my operating chair. You treat her like she was a one-day bride.
They got fever.
Pick up my operating chair. Wait here.
Hey, Doc, come back here.
Even when he's being silly, he does still have a threatening edge to him though, notably when he kills someone off screen while getting drinks, with Kate's reaction just telling everything. He's certainly not a moral character, as he easily throws the Doctor to the Clanton brothers to save his own skin, with his own remorse being that the Doctor unnecessarily had his tooth removed.
Sure seems a pity bother to have that tooth out.
He's a character who's scary because you can't take him seriously, which raises his threat because he is one. But the real villains are the Clantons, wanting revenge for the death of their brother at the hands of Holliday. The Doctor becoming mixed up with them immediately recognises the danger they pose.
Won't you introduce me?
Yeah, give me a pleasure. Doc, I would like you to meet the Clanton brothers.
The Clanton brothers. Oh, dear. I mean, How do you do?
Admittedly though, with this serial being a comedy, they can't be that scary, with them being somewhat idiots in the grand scheme of things. The final villain we have is Johnny Ringo, who is a lot more serious than any of our other villains, but ends up feeling a bit over the top. There's nothing wrong with him, but when the majority of the villains are incredibly comedic, this more down-to-earth sarcastic villain is strange. He doesn't show up until halfway through the serial, with him getting an entire episode named after him, but I admittedly can't remember anything about him other than him killing Charlie and taking part in the gunfight at the end, with him being shot by Holiday. He does have a short-lived side quest with Stephen, with them going after Holiday, Kate and Dodo, which does end with him betraying Stephen to the Clantons. The Doctor during all of this is dealing with Mr. Werp, who has arrested him. Stephen does try to break him out, but the Doctor refuses to do this, and we get this moment.
Mr. Werp! Oh, Mr. Werp. I say, can you do that?
No, and I wouldn't try it if I were you.
I have no intention of trying anything, only people keep giving me guns, and I do wish they wouldn't. I wonder, would you mind looking after it for me?
My pleasure.
Should I note this serial reveals he has a gun collection? This arrest was more for show to get him out of the way of the Clantons, with the Doctor just letting himself out at the end of episode 2. This is around when Seth Harper is killed. Now I have to admit that despite enjoying this serial, I've forgotten a lot of the smaller scenes between episode 1 and the gunfight. This mostly applies to Mr. Werp, and what he's doing because he's not anywhere near as interesting or as funny as Holiday. It's not that Mr. Werp isn't interesting with him getting plenty of great moments, but when compared with characters whose presence just makes them stick in your mind, or have lines which are so funny you can't forget them, admittedly I think this was a problem with writer Donald Cotton's previous serial, The Mythmakers, with some characters being completely forgettable against the more interesting ones, but I think the problem is worse here because you have a large cast like this, with many being written as comedic characters with funny dialogue, which is just elevated by their performances. Then some characters are going to get lost when they feel like they're from a far more serious serial. I might as well just get into the gunfight at this point, as this is what everyone is here for. Doc Holliday and Dodo return to Tombstone on Dodo's orders, with them being brought into the gunfight between the Earps and the Clantons. Due to Johnny Ringo showing up, Mr. Werp brings in his two brothers, Warren and Virgil Earp, to assist. This leads to Warren's death when Ike and Billy Clanton kill him while freeing Phineas Clanton, who was arrested. The Earps then challenge the Clantons, which leads to the titular gunfight. Now I won't ruin the gunfight, but the Earps win, mostly due to the Clantons' inability to hit anything. But I will say that having it shot on film really helped to make the scene far more intense than if it had been recorded in studio. But that's about it. Given that the serial spends a lot of its time building up to the gunfight and making jokes, it means that there isn't too much to talk about without me just discussing the plot. There are some good character scenes, especially for Dodo, but plot-wise it's just wrapping things up with the trio leaving, with the Doctor getting his wanted poster for Holiday which he decides to throw away before even leaving. That's kind of it. With a decent chunk of the cast dead, it means that there's only one or two people left in the town to wrap things up with, which basically amounts to the Doc becoming a wanted criminal. So on to the characters, with Dodo being the one I want to talk about the most. So Dodo is very strong as per usual. Being the first time that Dodo is completely separated from the Doctor and Stephen, it means that she can really shine and show off her character. She spends the majority of the serial with Doc Holliday, in which she is his temporary prisoner, but isn't afraid of him. She is a bit worried when she first learns of his identity, but does soon calm when around him and Kate. I think her best scene is when she forces Holliday to keep his promise to take her back to Tombstone, holding him at gunpoint.
We're leaving now.
What you aiming to do with that there offensive weapon?
Shoot you if I have to.
This is definitely not something we've seen from any of the previous female companions. Not even Barbara would have done this. Dodo is just far more confident in herself and far less fearful than her predecessors, which really makes it continue to stand out. Admittedly, there isn't much to say about either the Doctor or Stephen. Apart from Stephen singing, we have him doing his hair on camera in one of the monitors, but he doesn't do much for the serial. It's kind of weird to have Stephen being such a small part of the serial after the previous few where he gradually became more important, with him often driving the plot. But in this one, he's just sort of trying to keep out of trouble and finding Dodo, which just ends up with him in more trouble. The Doctor meanwhile has his own problems, with Holiday and the Clantons, but spends a lot of the serial not doing a lot. We're really beginning to see the Doctor taking a bit of a backseat within the show. This season has really lessened his role and importance of the stories. Now he of course does get his moments, and with a comedy he does get many funny lines, but his impact on the plot feels really minimal. Behind the scenes there's really only one thing I want to mention, and that is the director, that being Rex Tucker, this being his only directorial credit for the show, but he was originally the show's temporary producer before Verity Lambert was assigned. Tucker was not too happy about working on the show, thinking it had become childish sci-fi, and in fact, due to a disagreement with Innes Lloyd, wanted his credit removed from the closing captions of the episode The OK Corral. There are also the historical inaccuracies of the serial to be discussed, but I'm no expert on these events, so I won't go into anything other than just noting it. Notably though, Wyatt Earp was not in fact the ranking marshal, being deputised only half an hour before the gunfight. Additionally, a decent chunk of the characters in the serial weren't actually at Tombstone or participated in the gunfight, notably Johnny Ringo, who would live on for a further year. Or perhaps even more notably, Warren Earp, whose death is the catalyst for the gunfight wasn't present, in fact living a further 19 years after these events. There's definitely a lot of inaccuracies within the serial, which does defeat the point of it as a historical, but one thing to note is the real-life Big Nose Kate, who died at the age of 90 in 1940, meaning she lived into the lifetimes of several of the people who worked on the show, including Hartnell, who was 32 at the time. Overall, a very interesting serial. I do enjoy it, but I can't remember a whole lot about the plot. Many of the characters are memorable for one reason or another, whether that be for the actors playing them, or for how well written and realised they are. But a lot of it just sort of slides off your brain, being forgettable against the more interesting aspects. It also basically ruined the idea of the show doing comedy serials, with it also lacking enough historical accuracy to truly be a historical. It's certainly a fun watch, but perhaps does fail as a serial due to being quite mid and forgettable, while failing to educate the audience. But now the TARDIS has landed on a planet in the far future of humanity. Unseen to the travellers, some humanoid looms outside. Next time, the Savages.